Okay, now we move on. William Thomas is a name that should be familiar to you by now, if you're even a casual listener to this program. He is an investigator and has, in recent months, or I don't know, for about a year now maybe, been investigating contrails that he does not believe are contrails.
It looks like we're right back into it, Art. As you'll recall, it was this time last year, last November, that the chemtrail sightings and the illnesses really picked up, and we're right back there again.
Right. No, I agree. For example, just let me read you two I got today. Art, contrails. My brother is a licensed investigator, watched with his wife 8 planes laying contrails over Carson Valley today. Went from sunny and clear to cloudy and overcast. Both were taken sick with sore throats.
A lot of new spraying, and it appears that we are going to have some answers tonight. We're a little bit closer, I think, to finding out who is behind this. Interesting, you mentioned sore throats in your correspondence there.
Right.
I'm recovering tonight from a sore throat, which I got yesterday after very, very heavy spraying here. I haven't seen it this heavy.
What do we know, if anything more now, about what seems to be in these chemtrails? We had reports, for example, of spider-like stuff falling out of the sky, spider-like, mind you, and then people even getting samples of it in bottles and it virtually disappearing within hours. So what do we know?
We know from earlier clean samples, that is, samples taken off uncontaminated surfaces, that we are dealing in some cases with Pseudomonas bacteria and a host of fungus that can lead to upper respiratory problems. The Air Force says it uses carbon for weather modification, and the mica and aluminum and quartz material seem to have been components of chaff. Chaff, of course, is used to jam radars and heat-seeking missiles used by the military.
Well, William, you've been at this for a long time now, and of course we always ask the same question, and I'm going to ask it again. What do you think they're doing? What's your best guess?
I can only conclude from the evidence of many hundreds, in fact we're in the thousands now, Art, of reports from people taking ill, particularly this newest component of psychological and emotional disturbances linked to the chemtrail spraying, that these are deliberate attacks. I can only say, first off the top, obviously meant to suppress people, to keep them preoccupied and distracted and unaware of what's going on, and perhaps to sicken people just to the point of apathy, given the major event coming up January 1st and in the weeks beyond. I'm speaking here of Y2K and perhaps social breakdown. Here's the clincher. Dr. Cleto D. Giovanni of the National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, in the October 99 issue of American Journal of Psychiatry, writes that nerve agents can cause depression, insomnia, impaired thinking, and, thinking of the top of your show tonight, antisocial thoughts. G. Giovanni says biological weapons can diminish the ability to think clearly and produce depression, irritability, and hallucinations. And Art, I think that's what's going on with chemtrails today.
Well, I always get to this point, but I ask myself, why would our own government want to do this to its own people? I mean, if you do that, you're going to kill productivity. You're going to end up with maybe what's going on in Seattle went on in Honolulu and elsewhere. You're going to end up with all kinds of antisocial behavior and sick people, and that's going to cost the economy dearly. And so what would be the motivation of a government to ruin its own tax base?
Well, there you have it. The enemy is your own government. The purpose of the criminal activity is set to create disease, quell unrest, or even possibly stir it. The science is also represented by a conveniently quoted medical expert report. And, of course, a mandatory military component is also in. At the time, art's audience was perfectly primed to swallow this theory whole.
Pentru mine a fost o mare surpriză. Mulți m-au făcut conspiraționistă, nebună, când am îndrăznit să vorbesc atunci despre dârele pe care le vedem în anumite perioade ale anului de la avioane. Au zis, domne, nu înțelegeți, e un principiu, e condensul, e aia, e nu știu ce. Am înțeles, ok. Să știți că despre apa de ploaie se spune, la nivel internațional, sunt studii clare care arată că este extrem de toxică și de periculoasă. Doamna Angelina Hagim a făcut un experiment simplu și chiar s-a dus la autoritățile statului să și măsoare, să vadă ce conține apa respectivă. Haideți să vedem experimentul doamnei doctor.
Deoarece am văzut și cu altă ocazie că apa de ploaie conține particule magnetice, am vrut să filmez acest experiment. Am strâns apă de ploaie într-un recipient transparent pe fereastra dinspre acoperiș a casei mele. Și vedeți cum practic toate particulele din apa de ploaie sunt magnetice. Deci, se confirmă faptul că suntem stropiți cu particule magnetice. Există deja patentat o metodă pentru obținerea norilor prin particule de grafen sau probabil și cu alte metale cu proprietăți magnetice. Deci noi inhalăm aceste particule. S-a spus că, spre exemplu, magnetita poate ajunge în creier și într-un mediu extrem de poluat electromagnetic. Vă dați seama ce efecte au asupra sănătății noastre, asupra creierului, asupra celorlalte organe, aceste particule care pot traversa barierele organismului, dacă sunt de ordinul micronilor.
33 years later, the chemicals are different. The broadcasting channel is now a TV station known for its controversial anchors, but the purpose is almost the same. Make people sick via magnetite and possibly magnetized graphene. There's a they, a subtly defined occult, because the media law has evolved and TV channels need to be careful about their allegations. The pictures Art was displaying on his website have been replaced by a real and convincing phone video, evidence of the accusations the expert doctor makes. Dr. Hajima, one of the most vocal Romanian promoters of the chemtrail theory, has much more to say about who is behind it, how it's done, and why. But unlike the 1990s when Art Bell could air forbidden knowledge across the nation without consequence, today's media operates under stricter laws. Extraordinary claims now require extraordinary and legally defensible proof. So, the TV station did what modern broadcasters do best. They trimmed the story until it was still outrageous but just barely defendable. And the rest? That spilled, as it always does, onto social media. Every investigation, even a modest one, has to start with a repeat. That's the foundation of science, reproducibility. So, that's where we begin. We'll test whether Dr. Hajima's claims hold any truth. Later, we'll look at who, why, and how, but for now, we need to establish one thing. Are the materials she talks about actually present in rainwater and in the environment we live in? The first step was simple. Collect evidence. Rainwater, stormwater, and dust gathered from around my house. I used clean plastic and glass containers to avoid contamination. Then, to widen the scope, I collected samples from a remote area of Sydney to have a proper comparison. Sydney, after all, is one of the busiest airspaces in the southern hemisphere. If aircrafts were truly spraying chemtrails, this city's skies would be a perfect place to prove it, even if the trails here are barely visible most days. To make sure I wasn't country biased, I also gathered several water and dust samples from Romania during my 2023 and 2024 trips. And because Saharan dust routinely reaches Europe and even the Americas, with it being one of the largest natural particulate transport phenomena on Earth, I managed to sample some evidence of it in March 2024. Then came the analysis. I examined the liquid samples visually under a stereo microscope, then under compound and metallurgical microscopes for closer inspection. When I waved a magnet beneath the samples, small particles shifted and aligned. Different shapes, sizes, colors, most of them dark brown or silvery black. Some samples were dry, taken from soil, storm drains, and roadside sediment. I magnetically separated the non-ferrous material and placed the active fraction into clean containers for further microscopy. At first glance, the visuals seemed to confirm what Dr. Hajima claimed. Yes, there are magnetic particles in the environment, on roofs, in sand, in drains, on roads, everywhere. So, here are the preliminary conclusions. Magnetizable materials are area dependent. Larger particles cluster around high-traffic areas like roads and railways, while finer particles appear in rainwater from rooftops and forested regions. There's also a major difference between Romanian and Australian samples. Romania's rainwater carried visibly more sediment. Particle size varies from microns to millimeters, with smaller grains settling on rooftops and larger ones accumulating in soil and storm channels. Magnetized clusters often contain organic debris, dust, pollen, soot, even insect fragments that move together under a magnetic field. No area is exempt. Every environment tested, urban or rural, contained magnetizable dust. Even household dust mites can carry such particles. But science doesn't stop at "it looks like it."
Here's the clincher. Dr. Clito D. Giovanni of the National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, in the October 99 issue of American Journal of Psychiatry, writes that nerve agents can cause depression, insomnia, impaired thinking, and, thinking of the top of your show tonight, antisocial thoughts. G. Giovanni says biological weapons can diminish the ability to think clearly and produce depression, irritability, and hallucinations. And Art, I think that's what's going on with chemtrails today.
Menționez că laboratoarele nu sunt dispuse să facă analize, dar eu cred că noi, cetățenii, ar trebui să creăm presiuni pentru a afla ce se află în aceste particule. Dacă e magnetită, care, după cum spun anumite studii, poate ajunge și în creier și în circulație, dând atât probleme cerebrale cât și alte afecțiuni, inclusiv cardiace, boli pulmonare, boli autoimune. Deci e un lucru important. Dacă este grafen, de asemenea este un lucru important pentru că și acesta are efecte asupra sănătății, dar, cum știm, poate fi folosită și în crearea de interfață creier-computer. Această interfață creier-computer este unul din obiectivele marii resetări.
Just as in the 90s, when science of nerve agents was invoked to imply that the skies were laced with poisons, in 2023 Dr. Hajime updates the formula. The chemicals change, but the structure stays the same. Now it's graphene or magnetite, equally toxic but with a modernized purpose, a step towards the Great Reset's brain-computer interface. Back in Art Bell's era, America was reeling from the Cold War's hangover. Revelations about classified projects were spilling into public view. Project Shad, where the Navy tested its own defenses with chemical agents. MK Ultra, the CIA mind control experiments. And Operation Popeye, the Air Force's attempt to lengthen the Vietnamese monsoon through cloud seeding. For opportunists like Richard Finke and William Thomas, these were perfect ingredients. They styled themselves as crusaders for transparency, defenders of the people's right to know. They stitched together genuine government disclosures, post-Vietnam distrust, and anti-globalist sentiments simmering in the 1990s America. Adding a newly declassified Air Force document, Weather as the Force Multiplier, and the myth was born. Curiously, none of them mentioned the Soviet bioweapons program, the Sverdlovsk anthrax leak of 1979, or Ken Alibek's congressional testimony describing how Moscow ignored its own treaty obligations and expanded biopreparat. Nor did they reference Unit 731, Imperial Japan's chemical testing facility in Manchuria, a horror whose data both the Soviets and the Americans quietly absorbed after the war. Why? Because this story was never meant to point outwards. It was designed to aim inward, towards an enemy within, a shadow order supposedly pulling the strings of government after the Cold War had ended. Internal villains are renewable, external ones usually end with peace treaties. That framing, the betrayal from inside, has survived untouched to this day and reached global status. Dr. Hajime simply swaps the props. She removes the Cold War nerve agents and replaces them with 21st century wonder material, graphene, and its backup act, magnetite. Something tangible, something that sounds scientific, and something that really does appear in medical papers on pollution and therefore feels credible enough to spray across the sky. Because to her followers, it's too much to be just dust. So let's try again to look at the collected samples, the same ones that seem to appear in so many online rainwater analyses. But this time let's take a different angle. Is pollution really that small? Is magnetite so rare as a byproduct of pollution, or, to put it properly, the result of an ordinary human activity? In the United States alone, around 92% of households own at least one passenger car. Canada is almost identical. Across Western Europe, the figure ranges between 80 and 95% depending on the country. China is far lower, while in Australia, roughly 10 million households have at least one vehicle. Here, owning a car is a necessity rather than a luxury. The trillions of moving parts that make up these vehicles, pistons, bearings, discs, generate magnetite as a byproduct of heat and friction. Larger or smaller particles are produced through normal wear, but the biggest culprit is the brake pad. the very device that slows a car when needed. Here's some of the dust I collected from my own car a while ago. Under the microscope, most of it appears fine, metallic, dark, almost carbon black, but a magnet reveals its nature instantly. It moves. The brake pads themselves are a complex blend of chemicals bound together with high-temperature resins, pressed and formed under immense pressure. When they press against the brake disc, friction inevitably wears down both parts, releasing plumes of magnetite, aluminum, silicon carbide, and other particulates. Most of this ends up in the environment, carried by winds, currents, and deposited even hundreds of miles away, settling on rooftops, leaves, soil, and every other surface in its path. Now, let's expand a little. The United States alone has approximately 148,553 kilometers of rail track. China has about 109,000. Globally, conservatively speaking and counting only point-to-point rail, no sidings or branch lines, we're looking at a roughly 1 million km of metallic track. The US operates around 27,000 locomotives, while worldwide light rail systems use about 27,000 trams. Prague's tram network alone has 822 vehicles. Now imagine adding every railcar, subway, train, maintenance unit and auxiliary vehicle running daily on steel tracks, all of them equipped with wheels and braking systems that depend on friction, on pads made of similar composite materials. Each is a small-scale generator of magnetite and fine dust spread by wind and heat across cities and countryside alike. And that is where much of the mystery ends. The same metallic particles that coat car wheels, train lines, and city air eventually settle into vials and receptacles of theorists like Dr. Janina Hajime, ordinary human pollution, dust mistaken for proof of a global plot. To prove chemtrails, one would need controlled air sampling at flight altitude and chemical fingerprints matching jet exhaust additives. No such evidence has ever been produced. What's interesting to note is the intentional disregard of pollution in these narratives. Even though the reference to magnetite crossing the blood-brain barrier originally comes from pollution studies, that inconvenient detail is neatly omitted. Cherry-picking is one of the main behavioral constants of conspiracy movements and their promoters. In this case, the pollution factor is deliberately downplayed because acknowledging it would force another admission. The human activity, not secret elites, is a major driver of global warming and environmental toxicity. To recognize magnetite as pollution is to recognize that our industries, cars and railways are responsible for the rising levels of respiratory illness, allergies and cancers that plague the developed world. And that's something that people like Dr. Hajime cannot afford to admit because the blame must always be shifted elsewhere. To the occult, to the global shadow government set to enslave humanity through technology. How exactly? Through the brain-computer interface and through the modern technological scapegoat graphene or its villainous twin, graphene oxide. So let's talk about this so-called wonder material. Let's see if it's magnetic and if it's really floating in your rainwater. This suspended pendulum has its cavities filled with pyrolytic graphite, a multi-layered near-perfect block of graphene sheets. The control arm holds neodymium magnets powerful enough to attract any substance containing ferrous material. As we move the magnet arm closer, logic says that if graphite contained magnetic particles, it should be drawn in and stick. It doesn't. The graphite arm is repelled. That's because graphite, like water, is diamagnetic. It weakly resists magnetic fields instead of being drawn to them. That's also why you can buy this as a science toy on eBay. Diamagnetism means that graphene in rain samples would stay put, not dance around magnets as Dr. Hajime claims, unless clumped with ferromagnetic debris or organic material. Graphene by itself is not ferromagnetic.
Pentru mine a fost o mare surpriză. Mulți m-au făcut conspiraționistă, nebună, când am îndrăznit să vorbesc atunci despre dârele pe care le vedem în anumite perioade ale anului de la avioane. Au zis, domne, nu înțelegeți, e un principiu, e condensul, e aia, e nu știu ce. Am înțeles, ok. Să știți că despre apa de ploaie se spune, la nivel internațional, sunt studii clare care arată că este extrem de toxică și de periculoasă. Doamna Gianina Hajime a făcut un experiment simplu și chiar s-a dus la autoritățile statului să și măsoare, să vadă ce conține apa respectivă. Haideți să vedem experimentul doamnei doctor.
Anca Alexandrescu's show is nothing more than a publicity stunt. Just as Art Bell once gave airtime to William Thomas and cemented the chemtrail myth in the minds of late-night listeners, Anca's platform serves the same purpose and for nearly identical reasons. Art guests channeled anti-system rhetoric. Dr. Hajime does the same, only now the system is recast as a global occult cabal, plotting the Great Reset, with the Romanian government portrayed as a puppet of EU politicians and Western oligarchs. But here's an oddity worth noting. The villain is always the West. The East, Russia, China, India, Brazil, is never mentioned, even though much of the despised technology from 5G phones to base stations is manufactured there. There's a reason for that omission, and it lies at the heart of the original theory: globalization. That word terrifies people because it evokes job losses and the image of the rich growing richer while the poor drown in debt. But rarely does anyone frame globalization as a subtler form of modern slavery. Supply chains built on sweatshops in India, forced labor in China, and tax breaks traded for corporate loyalty in Romania, Poland, Hungary, Ukraine, or Moldova. Globalization made goods cheap, cars affordable, and Kmart, Target, and Carrefour household names. But it also dismantled local industries, small factories that once kept cities alive, while governments offered little in the way of retraining or new employment. For Romania, globalization and the fall of communism brought a brutal reckoning. A 50-year-old system collapsed. Corrupt, yes, but one that guaranteed everyone a job, even if they were incompetent or lazy. The post-1989 years stripped away what remained of the country's production base and triggered an exodus of its educated class. The Soviet bloc has already shown its hand. The West became the beacon in manufacturing, science, education, and health. But the Wild West that followed 1989 felt more like a purgatory than a promise. And when dreams collapse, people still look for someone to blame. By now, the answer to who question is clear. The West, its technology, its globalization, even its democracy, when it collides with local customs, religion, or migration, becomes the perfect scapegoat. Because conspiracy theories are like chameleons. They adapt to whatever landscape they inhabit, changing color just enough to provoke a reaction. Since Dr. Hajime's grievance is the computerization of human body, the so-called Internet of Bodies, the story needs an upgrade. Graphene and magnetic particles are useful, but something is missing. A bridge to the language of surveillance, a link to deep state monitoring, a whiff of NASA or CERN. Enter the new villain, silicon carbide. In a long article published by Active News, an outlet known for pro-Russian and conspiratorial narratives, Dr. Hajime lays out her case. The usual ingredients remain: carbon, aluminum, strontium, iron. But now she highlights silicon carbide, a real NASA material used to make durable circuits for harsh environments. Her article references genuine NASA papers, the story of electronics surviving Venus's heat and research on nanobots and smart dust. Then comes the pivot. She claims this technology is already being used for weather control, population monitoring, and inevitably vaccines. Rainwater, she says, carrying nanoscopic sensors sprayed from aircraft. Let's test that. Remember the magnetite and brake pad experiments? Here's silicon carbide of different granulations. It's common in brake pads because it stabilizes friction at high temperatures, keeping brakes efficient. Its high thermal conductivity keeps them cooler than organic composites. And yes, this silicon carbide is slightly magnetic, but not because NASA put it in there. While pure silicon carbide, the one used by NASA, is not magnetic, industrial synthesis leaves tiny metallic defects that make the powder magnetizable, exactly like the samples Dr. Hajime and I collected. Once we talk about silicon carbide, another source becomes obvious. Abrasive discs, cutting wheels, polishing compounds, every workshop and construction site on Earth. Every cut, every grind releases microscopic dust rich in magnetite and silicon carbide. Those particles drift, settle, and end up everywhere. Her article strives to connect NASA's microelectronics with her SEM photos of dust grains, but the resemblance isn't there. NASA silicon carbide chips are intricate lattices of microarchitecture. Her image looked like concrete crumbs and sediment clump. Pollution is recast as technology. Dust becomes surveillance. It's elegant storytelling, and that's why it spreads. Because people won't check NASA's archives. They'll trust the college of citations, the tone of certainty, and the promise that someone, somewhere, is secretly in control. The 2023 Chemtrails revival is as false as the one launched in 1996, but it thrives in poorer, more cynical soil where democracy corrodes under corruption, nepotism, lobbying, and propaganda. It's harder to debunk now because it speaks to frustration. The average person coming home from work doesn't want an economic lecture. He wants someone to blame. He needs an explanation for losing his job in 2020, for chaotic lockdowns, for government that ignores years of pandemic preparedness and then improvised in panic. It's easier to believe in deliberate harm than in bureaucratic incompetence. But Hajime's theory, like its ancestor, isn't built for truth. It exists to redirect anger towards technology, towards globalization, towards an imagined cabal. And the experiments meant to prove it, they ignore the other explanations staring back from the microscope. Magnetite, silicon carbide, aluminum, these come not from secret jets, but from us. Traffic, industry, construction, friction, and pollution. They're fingerprints of civilization, not of a shadow order. The new chemtrails myth isn't about poison. It's about fear of progress and a copious amount of politics. It stitches together vaccines, nanobots, 5G, and global communication into one neat tapestry of anxiety. And to dive into that, we'll need another episode of Bad Science.